Hi guys, and welcome back to the Sawmill. Today I'm standing in front of the Woodland Mills HM126. I've owned this for about 8 months now. This is the first sawmill that I've ever owned, and I have to say that so far I don't have any regrets on my part, that's for sure. It's a tool that's a bit more complicated to operate and keep maintained than a typical saw, such as a chainsaw, skill saw, miter saw, etc. And having said that, if you're not familiar with or have never used a sawmill before, like I hadn't when I first got this, you're bound to run into a few challenges and make a mistake or two over your journey, and that's what I wanted to talk about to you today. I want to highlight to you guys some of the challenges and mistakes that I've made with this mill, some that are specific to this mill, and some that I probably would have made no matter what sawmill it was. Having owned a sawmill for only 8 months, I'm still pretty new to the craft, but I feel that I've learned enough so far that I have a few minutes of good information to share, so that hopefully I can help somebody just starting out, or maybe it's somebody that just haven't run into the same issues I have yet, and hopefully that can help avoid some of the things that I ran into. Anyways, let's get started and jump right in. Alright guys, the first thing I'm going to talk to you about today is these log clamps, because I have found out that it is possible to put these in the wrong way. I can't remember if they come put together like this when they're shipped or if you put them together, but regardless, it doesn't really matter because they can be put in the wrong way. This is in the right way right now, and what I mean by the wrong way is you can take this out and spin it around, and there is a right and wrong way to put this in, and it actually goes in easier the wrong way. And when you put it in the wrong way like that, it lets this clamp slide back on an angle like this, and it still works, but it's more difficult and it's looser, and you really got to try hard to get it clamped in good. So like I said before, I'd never owned a sawmill before, didn't know anything about them, and mine, I had them in the wrong way probably for a month, I'll admit it. I didn't catch on until I thought, once I started using the mill and you know, got a bit more knowledge about it, I just got thinking, you know, everybody else is saying how good these are, how well they work, why aren't they working good for me? I'm making a mistake here somehow. So I wised up eventually and found out that I actually just had them in the wrong way, and that's all there was to it. So put them in the wrong way. Now you can see this won't really come back at all, and it's so much easier. You just slide it up into the log and bam, there you go. It's really simple. Most of the time you don't even have to tighten up the screw, and that's all there is to it. So I just wanted to highlight that. It's a pretty simple thing, but if I've done it before, maybe some other people have done it, and I know that it can be kind of annoying when all you have to do is flip it around the right way and it works 1000% better. So I'm gonna move on to the next thing. I've had this happen to me a couple times, and I don't know if I'm the only person, but I'm guessing it's happened to some other people too, is this throttle cable. They've made it extra long, which I understand they've had to do because as you crank this saw head up, it pulls the engine and everything up with it, and you need the extra length on the cable to rise as it goes up with it. So usually when you have it down low, there's a lot of extra slack like this, and I have had it, I don't know, just through moving around various things, loop over the tensioner handle like that. And this is the tensioner handle that you're supposed to loosen off when you're not using it, and then tighten back up to the proper tension when you are using it. So I have had it loop over like that before, not notice it, and then just start cranking, or I don't know if it's after I had it mostly tensioned and it's just got kind of wrapped around there. And like I said, it's not a big deal, but just keep an eye out for it, that it can get, you know, tangled up in there, and then you crank and it kind of pulls on that cord. Probably not too good for it, but just thought I'd mention that's one little issue that I've run across before, so thought I'd point it out to you guys too. Alright guys, the next little thing that I'll mention is this little pin here sticks in these grooves as you crank your mill up or down, and that just kind of locks your sawmill head into place. So as you're cutting lumber, the sawmill head cannot come up or down. This is adjustable. There's a little hex head in here, and you can loosen or tighten this nut on this part here. And as you could probably imagine, if you loosen it out more, the tension will get less, or if you bring it in this way more, the tension will get more. I've adjusted this from the factory, and I would just recommend checking this if you're setting up your sawmill to make sure this is really tight, because that's one of the things from the factory that wasn't tightened up really good when I got the mill. And it's a common theme here with me never owning a sawmill before. I didn't really understand what was happening. This kept coming loose on me, so all I had to do was get my little hex in there, and at the same time I didn't think there was really enough tension on this for what I would like. It kind of popped out of these grooves a lot easier than I would have liked to see it popping out, so I put more tension on this, and then I kind of cranked on this pretty good to get it nice and tight, and I've never had a problem since. So just something to watch out for if maybe you're just setting your sawmill up, or if you're having the same problem with this coming loose. Just bring it out so there's some more tension on it, in my opinion, and really tighten that down good. All right, guys, I just did a whole video a couple weeks ago, or a week ago maybe, on the Woodland Mills upgrade kit, so I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this. But if you didn't know, there are some parts on some of the sawmills that Woodland Mills themselves is deemed inadequate. So all you have to do if you have one of these sawmills is go on their website. There's a spot where you can type in the serial number for your saw. Your serial number is just right down here. You just type it in there and it'll pop right up for you any parts that they think you should upgrade, which is awesome. A company telling you that you should put new parts on it. And the best part is it's all free, and they just ship it right out to you, put it on. And having said that, this is part of my next point, is in the instructions for these new post sleeves that you get with the upgrade kit for this saw, they mentioned spraying silicone lubricant on the metal posts here, which in the owner's manual that I got, there was never any mention of that. But since I started doing that, big difference, makes the sawmill slide up and down so much better. Wish I had known about that before, but just thought I'd point that out in case there's anybody else that didn't know about that. Put some silicone lubricant on these posts and it works so much better. All right, guys, while we're on the topic of lubrication, I just thought I'd mention that at a certain point this winter, my mill started getting pretty difficult to push down the track, and it was getting pretty noticeable, so I wasn't too sure what was going on. And if you're just setting up your sawmill and not familiar with just how easy this mill should slide on the tracks, it's very heavy, but even still, you should be able to just take a finger literally and, you know, just like easily push it, and it should just slide just like that. Like, it should be really smooth and easy to push. So if you're finding you have any resistance, you definitely have a problem. And the Woodland Mills owner manual does have a section for troubleshooting, and it pretty much all has to do with your setup, whether it's square, level, etc., etc. And I was pretty confident in all that. So I, as usual, found two more reasons why your mill might not be sliding as easily as you think. One, if you live in a really cold climate like I do, I'm pretty confident that the issue I had was some water or something like that getting in here, in here somewhere on these wheels and freezing, which made it really difficult to push. Because actually my dad just suggested spraying some WD-40, so I just took a can of WD-40 and just soaked these wheels, like all four of them, everywhere that I could, and I just pushed the mill back and forth a couple times and it just immediately freed up. So just keep that in mind if you're in a really cold climate, or even if you're not, just keep it in mind as like a kind of first step in a troubleshooting process if you're finding your mill's really hard to push. Now the next thing I would recommend, if you're just setting your sawmill up, because this happened to me, it only happened once and it only happened when I was just setting it up, is these cables. These cables here are meant to keep the groove in your wheel clean, so as you push it just scrapes any sawdust and that out of there. But what happened to me is when this got shipped, these cables were installed in a place where this was actually right underneath the wheel. So when I set it down on the track here, the wheel was actually sitting on this cable. So if you can imagine, when I very first set the sawmill up and started pushing it, it was extremely difficult to push to the point where something was obviously wrong. Now, it only took us maybe 5 minutes to figure out what was going on, but I just thought I'd mention that in case you're at a spot where you're just setting up your sawmill, to watch out for that those cables aren't put too far underneath the wheel, that your wheel will be sitting down on top of them. Okay guys, I realize some of the things I'm talking about here might seem pretty minor, but I thought since I'm making this video, I'll just bring them up anyways. One of the things that I've done a couple times with this pull cord is, if you're wearing big gloves and you go to pull this pull cord from in here, you see how there's a couple bolts there? These gloves are a lot more forgiving than the bigger ones I've had when it's really cold out, but you can kind of get them caught on the bolt like that if you're not careful. And if you go to give it a good pull and your glove gets caught there, it gives you quite a jerk. So I just thought I'd mention that's one thing that has happened to me before. I've heard about some guys making their own eye out here to get the cord out here to pull. I think that might be something that I'm gonna look into, just because it's a little awkward getting in underneath there to give it a pull. Again, this isn't a big deal by any means, but it's just something I might look into, something I thought I'd maybe mention. And if you're a Woodland Mills owner or another sawmill owner and you think some of the things I'm going over are maybe kind of more obscure and maybe not a lot of other people have had those problems, I understand. I thought that, you know, a lot of the common issues people have with learning how to sawmill are out there in a pretty decent supply, so I thought I'd make a more specific video on some of the things that I've ran into that I haven't really seen a lot talked about in other people's videos, because I just thought maybe by pointing that out, it would add a lot more value to somebody watching this video. As far as mistakes and issues that I've had with the sawmill in my first 8 months, that pretty much does it for the Woodland Mills part of it that's specific to this saw. I'm going to move on to some things that I think I could say generally about any sawmill, and the first one is your setup. This setup was never meant to be permanent, but I still kind of regret the way I did it. If you can see down here, these are actually 6x6 posts on the ground, and you can see how much snow, ice, sawdust, etc. has built up to the point here. And on the inside, you can see the sawdust build up. The way that I've done it with these running lengthways sitting on the ground, I regret, because if you've never owned a sawmill before, you will be surprised how much sawdust comes out of this machine when you're cutting lumber, and it just continually builds up in the middle here. And with my posts running lengthways on the ground sitting there, it makes it really hard, especially in the winter months when this gets all frozen so easily. It makes it really hard to keep that cleaned out of there. So I wish that I had got this up off the ground a lot more, so that I could even get a shovel underneath something that was maybe on legs or something like that to keep that cleaned out better. But hindsight's 2020. I'm planning on building a lot better setup this summer, hopefully, and I just thought I'd mention that if you're at the point where you're gonna set something up, that it throws off a lot of sawdust, and it'd be a lot easier to keep it clean underneath if you didn't have something running lengthways sitting right on the ground. If you're like me 8 months ago and you've never owned a sawmill, operated one or anything, you might be surprised at the importance of keeping your sawmill blades sharp and how often you have to change a blade, get a blade sharpened, etc. If you're like me and you've just operated other kind of cross-cutting tools like a chainsaw, skill saw, anything with a circular blade, you can kind of stretch it. You're cross-cutting, as long as it's cutting through the wood, you can get away with not having that sharp of a blade in your tools. It's not the same with the sawmill. You're gonna have to change the blade on a consistent basis. You're cutting lengthways through the wood. You're gonna have to change the blade every few logs. If you don't, it's just gonna start producing wavy lumber pretty quickly, and then what's even the point, really? So just be prepared for that. I was kind of surprised at how often you gotta change the blades, and to go along with that, it's like everything else, right? If you've ran your chainsaw into the dirt before, it goes dull right away. So that's another thing to watch out for. Try to keep your logs as clean as possible. Get any dirt off them before you cut through that, because you're going to be throwing on a new blade faster than you got that one pass done, basically. So just thought I'd mention that. If you've never had a sawmill before, be prepared to be changing and sharpening blades quite a bit. Well guys, if you're like me and you didn't have any knowledge about sawmilling before starting, you probably still had a bit of an idea that, there's going to be some things surrounding sawmilling that are going to take up some of your time. But I personally didn't realize that all the other things you have to do take up a lot more of your time than actually just sawing the lumber. So for instance, on our property here, we cut down all our own trees and bring them into the mill. Here's some of the logs that I've been working on lately. That takes up a lot of time, going into the woods, cutting down trees, bucking them, cutting them down to length, bringing them in here. So that's just part of the process you have to do before you even get the log onto the mill. After you get the log up on the mill, you're going to have a lot of offcuts. You can see there's a little bit of firewood. There's quite a bit more back there. I've built myself a sawbuck to throw the offcuts up onto to make it a lot easier, but that takes up quite a bit of time, just maintaining your area, keeping it cleaned up. Then once you get all your lumber cut, you need areas to stack it. You can see I've got a trailer here stacked up with lumber. I've got a bunch more over here, and we're constantly coming in, picking up lumber, taking it up to the front to use on projects, because ultimately, why have a sawmill if you're not actually going to be using the lumber for stuff? So that takes up a lot of time. So yeah, just thought I'd mention that if you haven't had a sawmill or any experience with one, just be prepared that there's a lot of extra stuff that you have to do that maybe, in my opinion at least, isn't as fun as sawmilling. So just be prepared that there's a bunch of that stuff that goes with running a sawmill. And just a little side note to add onto that last point is, don't be surprised with how many projects, I don't know how many friends or family you have, but there's going to be a lot of projects that all of a sudden come up that need a lot of lumber. So you might think that's a good thing or bad thing. I personally enjoy it because I like sawmilling lumber, but I know that as soon as I got the sawmill in the last 8 months, the amount of lumber projects around that suddenly we need lumber for have seemed to skyrocket, but I'm happy about that. It just reaffirms that this was a great purchase for us. The last thing I want to touch on that I've been learning about a lot recently is just how much knowledge it takes to cut great lumber. If you're like me, you can set up your sawmill and within a day or two, you're cutting usable lumber, no problem. I've cut up a lot of lumber that first week that I had my sawmill set up, and we used it no problem here around the farm. But in the months since then and the research and stuff I've been watching, there's a lot better ways to cut lumber. You know, there's everything from quarter sawing to plane sawing, you know, keeping the pith nice and level with your sawmill. And I imagine there's just tons of things I'm not even thinking about, and tons of things that I don't even know about yet. But that's what kind of makes this a cool hobby, is that it's something that you can make a usable product right out of the gate, but the more and more you learn, the better and better you become at it. So that's going to be everything for me today, guys. I just wanted to share some of the, I don't know what you want to call it, some of the things that I've learned, some of the knowledge I've gained, some of the mistakes I've made in my first 8 months. And I hope that it's especially helpful to people just starting out, especially with this brand of sawmill, the Woodland mills. And you know, if even one of those things helps you avoid some of the mistakes I've made, then I think I've done my job for this video. So anyways, guys, thanks a lot for watching. Have a great day. I'll see you again.